This is Energy Solutions, a podcast from the Electric Power Supply Association, where we focus on the changing electric grid and ways to bring a reliable, affordable, and cleaner energy future to Americans. I'm your host, Todd Snitchler, EPSA's president and CEO. In March, EPSA held our second Competitive Power Summit, where we brought together the key players in competitive power generation, markets, and the broader energy industry to discuss the top challenges, issues, and opportunities facing our sector. Our focus this year was reliability and what is needed to deliver reliable power to consumers as the energy transition, or what will really need to be an energy expansion, marches on. This month, we're rolling out audio from the event in a special series. In this episode, we bring you a fireside chat with Nate Hanson. Nate is the president of power generation at LS Power, an EPSA member company with about 15,000 megawatts of all types of electric generation resources in competitive markets. LS also has a portfolio of energy transition platforms that include electric vehicle charging, competitive transmission, renewable natural gas production, demand response, energy efficiency, and more. Nate shared how LS is positioning for the future, but he also raised concerns about managing a reliable power grid in today's current landscape and called for policies and competitive market constructs that provide enough compensation to keep existing generation online to meet rising power demand. Here's our conversation.
Nate Hanson is the president of LS Power Generation, where he's held that role for over 12 years. Prior to joining LS Power, Nate was a vice president of NextEra Resources Power Marketing Division, responsible for wholesale load-serving transaction and commodity hedge strategies. And he also had responsibility for asset management and development, including mergers and acquisitions for its Northeast portfolio. Prior to that, Nate worked for the Intercontinental Energy Corporation, focusing on power plants and large industrial development and asset management. And he began his career at General Electric, where he focused on training and operations of power plants utilized in the naval nuclear program. Something makes me think you may get a small modular reactor question before we're done here. So Nate holds a BS in mechanical engineering from Worcester Polytechnic Institute and an MBA with honors from the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. So we asked Nate to join us to talk a little bit about both the asset ownership business, but also where LS Power is looking at making investments in both now and the future. So that's kind of what we want to talk about. Nate, let's kind of jump right in. There's been a lot of exciting announcements in the fairly recent past from LS. Can you give us kind of a brief overview about LS Power and kind of the company's diverse portfolio?
Sure. Maybe before we get started, I always find it interesting that you hold this conference during March Madness, which, and especially this year with a few of the upsets, and you have Princeton and Florida Atlantic in the Sweet 16, who would have guessed? But when you look at what's going on in our business, it's, we're a year later from when we held this last time. And if you really step back and think, how much progress have we really made to facilitating the transition, either on a regulatory basis or even legislatively? I don't think we really made any progress. And we're basically a year forward, closer to, having to manage the issues that are showing up in the grid in California and Texas and PJM in New England over the Christmas period. So the question is, where do we go from here? We need to really accelerate, how we think about and how we participate in resolving how we move forward so we can provide the reliability and frankly, the reliability at a very effective cost, because without being cost effective, consumers are going to revolt and the whole thing will be a failure. So look, a couple things I wrote down when Jim Robb was speaking, and I think he brings a very practical sense to how you need to manage the grid, and maybe I'll just repeat them quickly and then we can go on to,
Sure.
Managing the pace of the transition is critical. We have legislation and regulations that are going to allow as many renewables into the space as we can. The question is, that's great, but can you manage the grid when you do that? And I would argue we're on the tip of being able to manage it effectively even right now. increasing risk to the grid is just continuing, goes along with the same theme. Figure out how to retain resources. Our belief, and Caroline just mentioned it, is retaining the existing assets is the least cost alternative to making sure we can balance the grid. And I think there's a disregard with respect to how we compensate assets that are on the system today. And you're starting to see some of those go away. And I can talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. And RTOs, the other thing he said, RTOs need to revisit the market rules. It goes along with the same thing. How are we going to move forward with this transition and do it in a reliable and cost-effective manner? And I think he touches on a lot of the points that he knows needs to be maintained to operate the grid reliably. And we've had failures of that. So LS Power, what are we doing? A little bit of everything. We're an investor in the energy space. We're a developer, owner, and operator of power facilities and energy services companies. Our portfolio currently consists of about 15,000 megawatts of generation, everything from combined cycle and peaking gas facilities, solar, wind, pump storage, hydro, regular run-of-river hydro. And we also own a bunch of, call it energy transition platforms. We own C-Power, which is the largest demand response company in the country. We own EVgo, electric vehicle charging company. We have facilities that produce RNG, either from ag waste or landfill gas. So we're active in that space. And we're active in kind of the microgrid energy efficiency space through a company called Endurant Energy. So we're invested very broadly across the energy spectrum. We also are a very active developer in competitive transmission. We've been involved with that since Order 1000 came out and continue to be very, very active in that space. So.
That's a lot. You cover kind of the waterfront, so to speak. And it's funny that you mentioned March Madness. I never put that together. Here we are saying, we're planning this around the cherry blossoms, but it also happens to be right in the middle of March Madness. So there's a lot of discussion on the Hill today about viewing this as an energy transition, and I tried to kind of rebrand that a little bit as the energy expansion. And your diverse portfolio is certainly a testament to the fact that we have to deliver on all fronts, the proverbial walk and chew gum at the same time that I think some people aren't sure we can do, and I'm convinced we can. So in addition to gas plants and other fossil generation, kind of the legacy plants, LS is actively developing renewables and battery storage. You mentioned a little bit about that to work alongside the natural gas fleet. How do you view the positioning of LS's renewable portfolio today of the resources that you own, and where do you see it going as this energy expansion or transition as it goes forward?
Yeah, look, it'll be a big part of it. Renewable development or renewable resources are really the lowest cost carbon-free energy source today. We'll continue to expand that. This is a long-term trend that we are in right now. A couple years ago, we packaged a bunch of assets together and created a company called Rev Renewables. Mm-hmm. Rev Renewables is really our pump storage hydro fleet, our battery fleet, and a solar fleet along with a wind farm. But it was really developed as an operating company to really fund the development of a renewable, mostly solar, some wind pipeline of assets. We think to really grow this area, you need to have capital committed to it. Mm-hmm. And we felt this was the most efficient way to source capital to fund that renewable development. And they're working on a pipeline of up to about 10,000 additional megawatts. I think similar companies are doing other things or similar things where it's been a little slow, mostly maybe tied to the interconnection queue issues, to really get that development pipeline, committed and in the ground and operating. But we think that is going to be an area where we will continue to invest and continue to grow. And I think it's complementary with the rest of our portfolio. We've talked about energy transition, but it's really energy expansion. As soon as you put variable energy resources into the grid, you combine that with electrification, there isn't a study out there in different parts of the country that doesn't say that you need more firm resources as you go forward in time. So continuing to utilize the existing asset base that we have to be able to fill those gaps when the variable energy supply is not working or not generating is going to be critical from a cost effectiveness basis to make sure that we are trying to have as smooth of a transition as we can. So.
It certainly sounds like a both and not an either or position. And I think you're putting your money where your mouth is. I mean, you're making those investments based on that thesis.
Yep.
So with that, you note that ownership is a key value for LS. Can you talk a little bit about what that means when it comes to building and operating the infrastructure that you own and that we all rely on, frankly, as well as investing in new technology and kind of the innovative products and services that help you manage what you own?
Sure. Ownership, like at LS Power, and it may be similar to other companies, is, it's almost like if you're going to we make decisions up and down and around our portfolio, everything from day-to-day operations to how we market the power, how we, make investment decisions. It's like taking $1 out of your own pocket. We spend a lot of time, and we think we're a little bit innovative, and we try to notice longer-term trends and act on them in advance of, the rest of the market. We were one of the first to really start developing large-scale renewables out west. Mm-hmm. We built the first battery in California. We built that on a merchant basis without a contract, and that has led into more development in that area. But what we try to do is spend a lot of time developing our view on what are the services that the grid is going to need 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And how are they going to be able to manage the physical reality, as Jim talked about when we started today, the physical reality of how you need to operate the grid. And there are a lot of services out there, and Jim touched on a lot of them, that other services are going to be required, other types of responsiveness, call it. He talked about, we think about it mostly, and the most common thing talked about is responsiveness of assets. Mm-hmm. So we start to think about that, and then with that investment thesis, we own it. We see a need in 5 years. We will invest in that thesis. We will live with the financial results, and that's how we think about it. But that really is permeated throughout the organization. Mm-hmm. It really comes down to how do we make decisions day to day, right, all the way up to kind of the more macro themes around kind of how do we want to invest our capital into this longer-term secular change that we're all working through.
Right. And we've talked a lot about renewable generation and kind of where you're thinking about that, but we're also focused on reliability today. And we've heard quite a bit so far, and we're going to hear more about that this afternoon. But what's top of mind for you and for LS Power as you look at how you aim to provide reliable power while still investing in those new resources? We've talked about the both and a little bit, but kind of focus a little bit on how you're navigating those two investment decisions.
Yeah, look, we have an operating fleet. We spend a lot of time utilizing that fleet to provide the reliability services that we provide to the grid today across the country. Mm-hmm. I think what's top of mind is really whether or not we think there's adequate compensation in the markets that those resources can achieve on a go-forward basis. There's a lot of, I would say, pressure on assets within the restructured markets today based on market rule changes, and we'll be specific, I guess. Might as well rip the Band-Aid off, and Manu can address it later on with his discussion. But, with the changes that have been made within the PJM market, specifically with the market seller offer cap changes, and maybe a little bit less so, but the MOPR changes, we really have no competitive dynamic. So when we talk about providing reliable energy, we're in those markets. We have a large portfolio in those markets. But without the adequate compensation for these resources, some of these resources will continue to retire. And I think that's not a durable solution, especially when, if you look at the last PJM auction clear, 5 zones cleared within 5% of not having enough resources. We went through the whole debacle of having to go reprice the DPL zone. Otherwise, it would have probably cleared very high. I'm not sure what the number would have been. But you also have 5 zones, DPL being one of them, that are very on the edge, have on the hundreds of megawatts level on the edge of being in the same position. So the way the capacity market works there is right now with the market seller offer cap, you basically have a flat supply curve until you run out of enough resources, and then you're going to clear at a very high level. I don't think that's a great market structure to provide the right incentives to develop kind of long-term fixed assets, infrastructure type assets on a year-to-year boom-bust type of pricing mechanism. So I think top of mind with the reliability is what are we going to do with the market constructs where they stand today? You have, when you think about the reliability markets, and we'll talk about the capacity, in PJM you have a construct where you can lose 7 years of effective capacity prices in less than 2 days. And in New England, the way the penalty mechanism works, you're capped out after 2 hours, so why would you provide the reliability services beyond that point? So I think there's a middle ground that we need to start working towards to see how these all work together to provide the appropriate signal to invest in these markets. I would argue the capital markets are very aware of the low clearing prices in PJM, so people that own assets or have capital structures that were put on in the last few years probably aren't meeting what their investment projections were, and that puts stress on the existing assets, but it also puts stress on assets that need to be refinanced, and probably more importantly, it really moves the capital away, or it makes people question whether they want to invest in new resources in the markets, because that's what we're going to need.
You mentioned that Manu will be with us. That's the first speaker after lunch, so stay around for that. But the report that PJM just did that talks about retirements and really short-term reliability concerns, I think it's clearly a real-time red flag. And Jim Robb has talked about this, and they're not alone. MISO has also talked about some of this. And you sort of talked around it a little bit, but as you look at that from your seat, what are some of the market reforms that are fundamentally important to both retain the resources needed for reliability, but to fairly compensate resources that are coming onto the system? Or said another way, to the changing resource mix. I mean, how would you design it, if we blank slate it?
Yeah, look, we can go, I've a little bit of a long history here. You can go back to PJM. PJM was probably, you had the most confidence investing in the PJM marketplace, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And, there was a lot of development. And then we went through this period of maybe you have too many resources. But what the renewable space, your variable energy resources bring to the table is a much different operating profile for the grid operators. And trying to, ensure that we can respond to those variable energy gaps is going to be critical for the operators. And we've seen numerous examples now across the country where the grid operators can't maintain the system appropriately. So what we need to do, and it's not one simple thing, it's more of a holistic approach, is really to restore the confidence for the capital markets and the investors in this space, us being a large one in this space, to really want to deploy the capital with some confidence that they're going to get a return on their investment. We're okay from LS Power's perspective. We don't need to have a locked up contract to be able to invest dollars. As I mentioned, we developed a battery in California without a contract, and just relying on the volatility that we thought would show up in that marketplace. And setting the rules of the road and making sure you can get comfortable relying on them for some period of time, more than a year at a time, is very important to restoring investor confidence. So We can talk about a lot of different changes, whether it be in the energy market, ancillary markets, capacity markets, whatever you want to call them. We can lump them all together. But at the end of the day, it needs to be rules of the road. People need to be able to have the confidence that they'll be able to rely on them for an investment period. And as Caroline mentioned, these are not short-term. You're not getting a 1-year payback or a 3-year payback on these assets. It's much longer than that.
As you look at what you just described, and I mean, that's clearly durable and sustainable markets are what we're advocating for. That's what's needed for investment. How would you encourage policymakers or regulators to think about the decisions that they make, whether it's legislatively, whether it's administrative agency decisions, or if it is through FERC, who is addressing questions around market design? What advice would you give them in order to help from the investor and owner perspective to think about the impact of their decisions?
Yeah, look, it almost seems like we're living in a world where there's political statements on one side trying to score some points to make sure that we're either have a lower carbon footprint than some other state or area than the physical reality of actually providing reliable electricity at a cost-effective rate to all the residents that you serve. So there's two pieces to that. And, we focus more on the reliable nature of it. I think the more we can spread the word, and I'm glad Jim continues to talk about the issues in which I think are getting more imminent, and Mano will talk about how he sees them becoming more imminent in his market area. I mean, a year ago we said, well, we have some time. Well, the time is of the essence, and it's not really, it's not like a renewable versus a fossil discussion. We all know we're moving. We want to lower the carbon density of our energy supply. That's going to take time to do it in a responsible manner such that we can do it reliably. And so, look, the more we can just bring the practical reality to the discussion, I think will benefit all of us. So.
Yeah, the gap between aspirational goals and operational realities seems to be growing, and that's the gap we're supposed to be trying to close, I think. So there's a lot of discussion around the importance of transmission and other infrastructure, and of course, LS is one of the only competitive power companies that participates in competitive transmission infrastructure. And by last count, with about 680 miles of high voltage transmission completed and another 100 under construction, you've got the distinction of winning the first competitive solicitation in transmission for both PJM and MISO. So I guess while we're a generation organization, certainly transmission is part of the puzzle. Why is LS so focused on transmission in addition to generation? And what do you see are the benefits of competitive transmission to solving some of these problems?
Look, transmission is going to be a key element of the solutions here. If you look at a map of the United States and where all the the areas where you should develop renewables for solar, it's the desert Southwest, for wind, the most profitable areas is really the middle of the country and the north side of the country, and it's all the areas where people really don't live. So you need to get that power to load, and we've been working on that for many years. We also participated in the CREZ process back in Texas, where it was the same solution. All the good wind resource was out in West Texas. There was no load there, so you had to bring it to load. I think more, just across the country, we need to do more of that. There's a lot of obstacles. There's a lot of, when we talk about the competitive transmission space, there's a lot of state issues around ROFR laws where, the incumbent utilities can build the transmission or have the first right to build the transmission. And we don't think that's the best solution for customers. We've always felt that we could bring innovation to this space. Most of this is through long-term planning studies where a transmission solution is proposed, and then you can bid on it either as is or come up with an alternative solution. So we've been very successful in coming up with alternative solutions that are least costly. And we can also, from a financial perspective in certain areas, manage the risk for consumers, where we will fixed costs as part of that offer to build the transmission. So whether it be just through innovative solutions or innovative financial tools that we are comfortable managing around, we think at the end of the day, we can build that at a lower cost for the consumer. And we've been competing for that, frankly, since LS Power was formed, where you're competing with utilities since they didn't build it, we could build it more cheaply, sure, and it'd be more cost effective for the customer. So transmission is right in our, ballywick in terms of being able to move that forward, and it provides the same opportunity to provide a smarter solution at a lower cost, and I think that benefits everybody.
Yeah, I'm going to borrow Carolyn's line that the clue is in the name. I mean, when you talk about competitive transmission, that's kind of the key to what we want to talk about. So what's it take for a competitive power company to build transmission? So if you're on that side, I mean, what hurdles do you face? And I suspect we're going to hear permitting and siting, but you may have other things. Or on the flip side, what allows you to do it better? Why are you the better alternative?
On the better side, I think we focused on our innovative and maybe creative solutions packages, either whether that be technical or financial. But we're building the transmission as everybody else would build them once the solution is known. And so I don't think, there are issues that either incumbent utilities or whatnot may have benefits around permitting or siting. So making sure that, use of right-of-ways and other issues like that are, level the playing field with respect to the use of those types of assets that you need to finish the transmission is very important. Whether the utility builds it, whether a competitive provider builds it, they should have the same rights to be able to complete the project once it's approved. And so that's a long discussion, and sure, we have people that focus on that every day of the year,
right?
And so we'll continue to fight that fight, if you will.
Yeah, let me just follow up on one point of that. How comfortable are you that the timeline to construct is actually achievable, or is the timeline for approvals really the hindrance to being able to do more, or is that just one of the challenges that you face in trying to help develop and build out what's clearly recognized by everyone as needed infrastructure?
Yeah, they're all a little bit different. It depends on the location and in how you designed your particular project. So you're going to have different issues, sure, with different projects. But, we get comfortable, we're bidding on these things. It's a firm bid. So we have to make sure that we're comfortable with the timing, the supply chain issues, everything that goes along with project development before we're offering that to the marketplace. And, that will be an assessment of permitting and siting risk and, sure, alternatives if we can't have the route that we want, and all those types of issues that every project developer deals with.
Yeah. So as we get close to the end of our allotted time, I'll ask you, what are you looking forward to, or what do you think the opportunities are for organizations like LS or others as you look at the energy expansion and where we're going? I mean, what's the thing that you're most excited about?
Well, look, I think if you're not excited to be in the energy sector at this point in time, I'm not sure there's a better time, at least in my history, to be in this industry. There's so much going on, from expansion of existing facilities or repurposing of our existing facilities, to renewable development that we're involved with, to all these other little energy services companies that either are going to be supported by the electrification or the energy efficiency initiatives around current commercial building use. They're the whole gamut. We can participate in all of that, and this is going to continue for a long time. So to take a 50, 60, 70-year history of energy production and how to commercial and residential development, and try to move that within people's time frames of 100% clean energy by 2030 is not really practical. So it's going to be a long-term trend that we will continue to participate in various different manners. And one thing, we think of our assets, we have a pretty large footprint, but like our Ravenswood asset, which is our RISE platform, we really think about it as key infrastructure in New York. One, it's needed now to keep the lights on during peak periods, but over time it's going to change. Right now we're contemplating repurposing that. We're involved with an offshore wind proposal where we bring offshore wind into land it at the Ravenswood site, retire one of the fossil sites as part of that, and use its injection capability to power New York City with offshore wind. The one thing about New York City is it's very expensive to interconnect in other locations other than the 4 or 5 large power plants that were built and the whole structure was built around. So repurposing of existing sites or incrementally adding to them is something that we're looking around our existing portfolio all the time.
Well, I know we're approaching the end of our time, but you've apparently pushed some buttons, so I'm going to ask at least a couple of questions of you. So how would you design markets so that load clearing prices are high enough to keep needed capacity online? And should we pay critical resources to stay online? I guess it's 2 questions, general, same flavor.
Yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, we like to see market constructs that result in prices necessary to support the assets that are needed to provide those services. So when we go down this path of subsidizing existing assets or RMR contracts in some markets, as they're called, we don't think that's a great solution. I think that's a great short-term solution for very localized constraint issues. But at the end of the day, if you can't support the resources that you need in the market area to provide those services that you need, then the market is not constructed correctly. So, one of the key things that we have thought about, we have a lot of peaking assets in our fleet. So they're very low fixed cost assets. It was really based on a view that over time, we'll go through a trough where we're going to have low clearing prices and low market prices for some time. That'll put the pressure on the higher fixed cost assets, mostly coal, which have fixed costs that are probably 3 to 4 times what our peaking assets are. So being able to, I think we can see that, but I think trying to retain assets on a subsidized or manner where the market revenues don't support them is not really a durable solution. So,
all right, last one, since we're keeping we're between you and lunch. So, what type of conditions?
That's good. I'm starving.
Good. Well, what type of conditions do LS or investors need to invest capital in new or existing thermal resources, or what conditions are missing maybe in ISO or RTO markets, including decisions by their regulators? I mean, what do you see there?
Look, we do invest in existing fossil assets. We don't think the current market's construct support new build, but they do support lower valuations of those assets, and we continue to acquire those assets in the various markets that we're looking at. But again, I think the point for the regulators and the RTO operators is we really need to develop this market construct that really supports retaining the assets that you need to operate the system. We are fully open to having the RTOs say, this is what we want. This is what we're going to need to operate the grid reliably. And then let us respond. That may require us to, shut down some of our assets and invest in others. But I think we're in the crossroads of not getting clear direction in terms of what the grid operator needs and will need 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It's not specific enough for us to make investment decisions in. And we really need to focus on changing that process so that there is clear, a clear direction, more transparency, and to let the market participants figure out how to best solve that problem that they're dealing with.
Great. Well, thank you, Nate. We appreciate you taking time to visit with us and share a little bit about LS's perspective. I will tell you that we will be taking our lunch break now. Lunch is out there.
You can find video and more takeaways from Nate's remarks, as well as more information about energy policy and competitive power markets on EPSA's website at epsa.org. In case you missed it, listen to our previous episode featuring my fireside chat with Carolyn Comer, President of Shell Energy North America and Senior Vice President of Shell Energy Americas. And stay tuned to hear my conversation with Thad Hill, President and CEO of Calpine Corp. To make sure you don't miss an episode, subscribe to Energy Solutions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Energy Solutions is brought to you by the Electric Power Supply Association. EPSA represents America's competitive power suppliers, which bring about 150,000 megawatts of power generation resources to customers throughout the United States. Discover the power of competition at www.epsa.org.